You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. What if I told you that some of the confusion you've experienced with women wasn't random, wasn't bad luck, and wasn't because you did something wrong, but because you were never taught what they are quietly struggling to hide? Most men are trained to look for confidence, attraction, and emotional certainty. But beneath the surface, there are psychological weak points, subtle insecurities, internal conflicts, and silent fears that rarely get spoken about. Not because they don't exist, but because exposing them would shatter the image. And here's the uncomfortable truth. The men who understand these hidden dynamics don't chase, don't beg, and don't. They stay calm. They stay grounded. And without trying, they become magnetic. In this video, you're going to learn 9 psychological weaknesses women try to hide from men, not to manipulate, not to exploit, but to see clearly, to stop taking things personally, to stop reacting emotionally, to move with quiet confidence instead of confusion. Watch this video till the very end, because the final points tie everything together. And once you see the full picture, you'll never interpret female behavior the same way again. Number 1. Fear of emotional vulnerability. Fear of emotional vulnerability is rarely loud. It doesn't announce itself. It hides behind control, sarcasm, detachment, testing, and emotional restraint. And the more intense the feelings, the stronger the urge to guard them. This fear isn't weakness in the way most people think of weakness. It's protection. It's the instinct to stay composed when exposure feels risky. And if you don't understand this, you'll misread behavior, react poorly, or try to force openness, destroying attraction in the process. Here, what you need to grasp first. Vulnerability feels like loss of leverage. When emotions are revealed, control feels compromised. And for many women, emotional exposure carries the risk of being judged, dismissed, or emotionally overpowered. So instead of opening directly, emotions are filtered, disguised, delayed, or tested. This is where men often fail. They interpret guardedness as indifference or manipulation, then respond with pressure, withdrawal, or overcompensation. None of that works. Stoicism teaches something radically different: strength through steadiness, not intrusion. Wrote, the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. When fear dominates the inner world, behavior reflects caution. Emotional vulnerability threatens the internal order, so defenses rise. Your job is not to tear those defenses down. Your job is to remain composed enough that vulnerability feels unnecessary to fear. And that starts with you mastering your own emotional exposure first. You must understand this clearly. Emotional safety is not created through reassurance, persuasion, or emotional intensity. It's created through consistency and calm presence. When you stay grounded, when you don't react sharply to emotional shifts, when you don't demand openness or punish restraint, you remove the perceived danger. Vulnerability doesn't open in response to pressure. It opens when there is no pressure at all. Epictetus said, "If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid." In this context, it means letting go of the urge to extract emotional truth. You don't interrogate feelings. You don't chase confessions. You don't push for clarity when uncertainty is present. You hold your frame. You regulate yourself. And in doing so, you communicate something powerful without words. Emotions are welcome, but never required for validation. Fear of vulnerability also feeds into emotional testing. When emotions are risky, they're revealed indirectly, through contradiction, through mood shifts, through distance. These aren't invitations to react, they're checks. Will you stay the same? Will you become reactive? Will you lose yourself trying to understand me? Every time you remain steady, the fear weakens. Every time you become emotionally erratic, it strengthens. Stoicism teaches emotional discipline not as suppression but as clarity. Seneca warned, We suffer more often in imagination than in reality. Fear of vulnerability thrives in imagined outcomes: rejection, judgment, loss of power. When you don't add fuel to those imagined dangers, when you don't dramatize emotional moments, you collapse the fear silently. You show that openness does not lead to chaos. Now here's the part that requires action from you. You cannot expect emotional vulnerability from others if you haven't mastered your own. Not oversharing, not emotional dumping, but self-honesty without neediness. When you are comfortable sitting with your own emotions, without urgency, without seeking reassurance, you become non-threatening. You're not hungry for emotional access, and that lack of hunger is deeply stabilizing. Start with this exercise. For the next week, notice every moment you feel the urge to push for emotional clarity, the desire to label, define, resolve, or extract meaning. Pause, breathe. Let the moment exist without interference. This trains restraint, and restraint communicates safety far more effectively than words ever could. Another exercise: practice emotional neutrality in moments of uncertainty, not coldness, not distance, calm acceptance. Repeat internally, "I don't need this moment to go any particular way." That mindset removes pressure instantly. Vulnerability cannot emerge when it's being hunted, but it often emerges when it's allowed to arrive on its own terms. Reminded himself, be tolerant with others and strict with yourself. Apply that here. Be tolerant of emotional guardedness, strict with your reactions. You don't punish distance. You don't reward drama. You don't overvalue emotional access. You value alignment, presence, and integrity. Over time, this recalibrates the dynamic. Fear dissolves when there is nothing to defend against. You also need to abandon the fantasy that vulnerability is always verbal. Emotional openness often shows up as comfort, presence, softness, or ease, not confessions. When you expect vulnerability to look a certain way, you miss it entirely. Stoicism trains perception. You observe without demanding interpretation. You let meaning reveal itself gradually. Another practical habit to build: stop trying to emotionally fix moments. If something feels tense or withdrawn, don't rush to smooth it over. Sit in the silence. Maintain your posture internally and externally. This is difficult at first. Your nervous system will crave resolution, but this is exactly where growth happens. Stillness invites trust. Epictetus said, "Don't explain your philosophy, embody it." Emotional safety works the same way. You don't talk about openness. You embody stability. You don't chase emotional truth. You make emotional truth unnecessary to prove worth. That paradox is powerful. The less you need emotional access, the safer it feels to offer it. And here's the final shift you must make. Stop seeing fear of vulnerability as something to overcome. It's something to respect. Respect dissolves fear faster than force ever could. When you respect emotional boundaries, you become someone worth opening up to, not because you asked, but because you didn't need to. Your task is simple but not easy. Regulate yourself. Stay consistent. Act from principle, not emotion. Let vulnerability come to you not because you earned it through effort, but because your presence made fear unnecessary. That is Stoic strength. Quiet, grounded, unshakable. Number 2, dependence on external validation. Dependence on external validation is one of the most quietly powerful forces shaping behavior, and the reason it stays hidden is because it often wears the mask of confidence. You see poise, polish, charm. What you don't see is the constant internal calibration. How am I being seen right now? Am I still desired? Am I still chosen? That need for reassurance doesn't announce itself loudly. It hums in the background, influencing reactions, moods, and decisions. And the moment you understand this dynamic, not to exploit it, but to stop being pulled into it, you regain control of your own center. Here, where you come in, The danger isn't that others seek validation. The danger is when you become a supplier of it unconsciously, when your tone shifts to soothe, when your actions subtly adjust to maintain approval, when you reward insecurity with overtension. The Stoics warned against this long ago. Epictetus said, "If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid." What he was pointing to is radical independence from opinion. The moment you stop managing how you're perceived, you stop feeding the validation loop. And when that loop isn't fed, its power weakens. External validation works like a drug. It feels good briefly, then demands another hit. Compliments, attention, reassurance, none of these are bad in themselves, but dependence changes the dynamic. It turns interactions into transactions. Approval is exchanged for behavior, and when you unknowingly participate in that exchange, you lose leverage without realizing it. Stoicism teaches you to step out of that economy entirely. You don't withhold approval to punish. You simply stop overgiving it to regulate emotions that aren't yours to manage. Wrote, "I do what is mine to do, the rest does not disturb me." Read that slowly. That's the mindset you need. Your role is not to validate, rescue, or stabilize someone else's self-image. Your role is to act with clarity and integrity. When you do that, something interesting happens. The need for validation becomes visible because it's no longer being constantly met, and visibility changes behavior. This doesn't require coldness. It requires restraint, calm presence, emotional self-sufficiency. When you're grounded in yourself, you don't rush to reassure. You don't over-explain. You don't inflate egos or shrink yourself to maintain harmony. You stay steady. And steadiness is disarming. It forces others to confront their own inner noise instead of outsourcing it to you. Here's a hard truth most people avoid. Validation seeking thrives on inconsistency. If your attention fluctuates based on moods or reactions, it keeps the cycle alive. But if your energy remains even warm but not reactive, attentive but not chasing, the dependency loses its grip. Seneca captured this perfectly when he said, "He who depends on himself alone is armed against fortune." Self-dependence is contagious. When you embody it, you invite others to find it too, or reveal that they can't. Now let's bring this inward, because Stoicism always starts with you. Ask yourself where you still seek validation. Where do you want to be approved of, admired, chosen? Be honest. This isn't about shame. It's about freedom. Every unexamined need becomes a handle someone else can grab. The Stoic path is about removing handles, about becoming smooth where others expect hooks. A simple practice. For the next week, notice every impulse to seek reassurance, verbally or emotionally. Don't suppress it. Just pause, breathe. Let it pass without acting on it. You're teaching your nervous system that approval is optional, not oxygen. This alone will sharpen your presence. Another exercise: reduce unnecessary explanations. When you explain too much, you're often seeking agreement, not clarity. Practice saying less. Let your decisions stand without decoration. This builds inner authority, and inner authority is felt immediately, even if it's never named. You should also practice giving validation only when it aligns with your values, not when it's demanded by insecurity. That distinction matters. Authentic recognition strengthens connection. Automatic reassurance weakens it. Reminded himself, the tranquility that comes when you stop caring what they say or think or do. That tranquility is what shifts dynamics effortlessly. As you do this, you'll notice something subtle. You'll feel less urgency, less pressure to manage emotions that aren't yours. You'll stop reacting to fluctuations in attention or mood. And in that stillness, power returns to you, not power over others, but power over yourself. Dependence on external validation thrives in noise. Stoicism thrives in quiet. Choose quiet. Choose self-sufficiency. Choose to be the one who doesn't need to be constantly seen to feel solid. When you live from that place, you don't trigger insecurity, you reveal it. And revelation is the first step toward real strength, for you and for anyone watching closely enough to learn. Number 3, anxiety, about aging and desirability. Anxiety about aging and desirability sits beneath the surface more often than it's admitted, and you can feel it without anyone saying a word. It's quiet, persistent, and rarely spoken directly. What matters for you is not judging it, fixing it, or reacting to it emotionally, but understanding how it operates and how your own composure changes the dynamic entirely. Aging represents loss of control over time, attention, and perceived value, and when desirability feels threatened, insecurity doesn't announce itself. It hides. It reshapes behavior. It looks like heightened sensitivity, sudden defensiveness, or an unspoken need to feel chosen again and again. When you recognize this without exploiting it or fearing it, you step into a position of calm authority. Stoicism teaches you to see things as they are, not as your emotions color them. Wrote, observe constantly that all things take place by change, and accustom yourself to consider that the nature of the universe loves nothing so much as to change the things which are. Aging is change. Fighting it creates anxiety. Accepting it creates peace. When someone struggles internally with fading desirability, they're resisting change, trying to freeze a moment in time where validation felt effortless. Your role is not to reassure compulsively or withdraw coldly, but to remain grounded in your own self-respect. Anxiety feeds on instability. Calm dissolves it. Here, where you must be careful. If you react by overvalidating, you reinforce the fear. If you react by distancing emotionally, you amplify it. Stoicism doesn't choose either extreme, it chooses steadiness. You don't need to comment on age, beauty, or worth. You don't need to compete with time. You simply stay present, composed, and non-reactive. That alone communicates something powerful. Value is not scarce here. You are not frantic. You are not chasing youth, nor are you threatened by its absence. That unspoken message is stabilizing. Epictetus said, "Don't explain your philosophy, embody it." This applies here more than anywhere. When you embody calm acceptance of time, you become a mirror. People feel their own tension when standing next to your ease. And ease is attractive because it suggests safety, not emotional dependency, but emotional stability. Anxiety about aging often seeks reassurance through attention spikes, emotional tests, or subtle comparisons. When you don't take the bait, when you don't rush to soothe or withdraw to punish, you show strength without cruelty. You also need to understand this. Desirability anxiety is not about age itself. It's about relevance, about being seen, about mattering. When someone feels their window closing, they may unconsciously try to regain leverage. Stoicism teaches you not to play leverage games. Seneca wrote, "He suffers more than necessary, who suffers before it is necessary." Anticipated loss causes more pain than loss itself. Your consistency, your calm pace, your refusal to escalate emotional exchanges, these things prevent imagined fears from becoming real conflict. Your responsibility is internal discipline. Ask yourself, do you react to insecurity with impatience? Do you feel the urge to prove dominance, youth, or superiority? That urge reveals your own fear of time. Stoicism demands that you confront that first. Aging applies to you as well. Your power comes from accepting that fully. When you stop measuring worth through attention or novelty, you become immune to manipulation rooted in those fears. Now let's turn this into action. First exercise, practice neutral presence. For the next week, notice when conversations drift toward validation-seeking energy. Don't label it, don't correct it. Simply remain steady. Same tone, same pace, same emotional temperature. This trains you to stop reacting to anxiety and start dissolving it through consistency. Second exercise, audit your own relationship with aging. Write down what you fear losing over time. Be honest. Status, strength, attraction, control. Then write what remains untouched by time: character, discipline, values, self-command. Reminded himself, very little is needed to make a happy life. It is all within yourself, in your way of thinking. When you internalize this, you stop projecting fear onto others. Third exercise: detach desirability from urgency. Move slower in decisions. Speak when necessary, not to fill space. Allow silence to exist without rushing to manage it. Anxiety hates silence because silence exposes insecurity. Calm people are comfortable there. Become one of them. There's also a deeper layer here. When anxiety about aging is hidden, it often surfaces as control, over narratives, over emotional tone, over perceived competition. Stoicism teaches you to relinquish control over what you cannot command. Epictetus said, "Make the best use of what is in your power and take the rest as it happens." You cannot stop time. You cannot manage another person's fears. What you can do is refuse to let those fears dictate your behavior. When you stay aligned, something subtle happens. The anxiety has no mirror, no fuel, no reaction. And without reaction, it softens. Not because you confronted it, but because you didn't reward it. This is emotional leadership without force. You must also resist the temptation to feel superior for noticing this weakness. Stoicism rejects arrogance as much as insecurity. Compassion without indulgence is the balance. You see the fear, but you don't kneel to it. You don't exploit it either. You remain yourself. That integrity is felt immediately. Seneca wrote, "No man is more unhappy than he who never faces adversity, for he is not permitted to prove himself." Anxiety about aging is adversity of the mind. How you respond proves who you are. If you respond with steadiness, patience, and grounded confidence, you elevate the entire interaction. You create an environment where fear loses relevance. The final exercise is simple but difficult. Choose one habit that reinforces your own timeless value: daily discipline, physical training, study, silence, commitment to principle. Do it consistently, not for appearance but for alignment. When your life reflects inner order, you stop reacting to outer insecurity. And when you stop reacting, you become unshakable. This is the Stoic advantage. You don't deny fear. You don't feed it. You outgrow it. And when you do, anxiety about aging and desirability becomes visible not as a weapon or a weakness, but as a signal that calm strength is needed. And you are prepared to provide it simply by being who you already decided to become. Number 4, need for control in relationships. The need for control in relationships often hides behind softer language: concern, care, emotional closeness. But at its core, it's about managing uncertainty. And uncertainty is what most people fear the most. When control becomes a quiet obsession, it's rarely about power over you. It's about power over anxiety, over outcomes, over the possibility of loss. Once you understand that, you stop reacting emotionally and start responding intelligently. More importantly, you stop giving away your center. Here's the shift you need to make first. Control only works on people who are internally unstable. If your sense of self moves every time someone pushes emotionally, control becomes easy. But when you're grounded, when your mood, decisions, and direction don't depend on external reassurance, control attempts lose oxygen. They can't breathe. Stoicism has always been clear on this. Epictetus said, "If you want to be free, do not desire what is outside your control." When you stop outsourcing your emotional balance, you become unreachable in the best way. The desire to control often shows up as emotional steering, subtle pressure, unspoken expectations, shifts in warmth or distance meant to guide your behavior. This only works if you chase harmony at the cost of self-respect. When your priority becomes keep things smooth, you start negotiating your boundaries without noticing. That's where control takes root. not through force but through your willingness to bend. The moment you decide that inner alignment matters more than emotional comfort, the dynamic changes. Reminded himself, you don't have to turn this into something, it doesn't have to upset you. That sentence alone can rewire how you move. Control thrives on reaction, it feeds on urgency. It grows stronger when you rush to fix emotional tension, when you slow down instead, when you let silence exist, when you don't immediately adjust to emotional shifts, you reclaim your position. Calm is not passive. Calm is selective engagement. What weakens you isn't someone else's desire for control, it's your own fear of disapproval. Once you see that clearly, you stop personalizing behavior. You stop interpreting emotional fluctuations as signals you must respond to. Instead, you observe. You stay consistent. You act from principle. That steadiness creates a quiet resistance, not confrontation, resistance through self-possession. Seneca wrote, "No man is free who is not master of himself." Read that again. Control fails against self-mastery. When you regulate your emotions, your pace, your decisions, you remove leverage. You don't need to challenge control directly. You simply don't participate in it. You don't reward it with compliance or frustration. You continue as you are. That alone forces a. This is where many men slip. They think strength means pushing back aggressively or asserting dominance. That only escalates the struggle. Stoic strength is different. It's non-reactive. It's rooted. You don't argue about freedom. You demonstrate it. You don't explain your boundaries. You live them. When your behavior doesn't change in response to pressure, control loses its function. Now let's talk habits, because understanding this intellectually isn't enough. You need to train your nervous system to tolerate emotional tension without moving to fix it. Start small. When you feel the urge to explain yourself unnecessarily, pause, breathe. Let the urge pass, say less. Not to punish, just to stay aligned. Silence, when chosen calmly, is one of the most powerful signals of self-respect. Another exercise, define what you will not negotiate. Not what you demand, what you maintain, your pace, your values, your time. Write them down, read them daily. Then act in accordance with them even when it creates discomfort, especially then. This is how internal authority is built, not through declarations but through repetition. You should also practice emotional ownership. When tension appears, don't absorb it, don't rush to resolve it. Ask yourself one simple question internally: is this mine to carry? Most of the time, the answer is no. Let emotions exist without assigning yourself responsibility for them. This is not detachment, it's clarity. Said the tranquility that comes when you stop caring what they say, or think or do, only what you do. That's the Stoic edge. You focus on your conduct, your response, your alignment. Control dissolves when it has nothing to grip. Over time, something interesting happens. When control no longer works on you, it often softens or disappears. Not because you fought it, but because there's no reward in it anymore. People adjust to the energy you consistently present. When that energy is steady, self-directed, and emotionally contained, dynamics shift naturally. The real takeaway is this: you don't need to outmaneuver control. You need to outgrow it. Become so anchored in your values that external pressure feels irrelevant. Train yourself to stay calm where others rush, steady where others sway. When you do, you don't just protect yourself, you elevate the entire dynamic. So stop reacting, stop over-explaining, stop surrendering your center to maintain peace. Choose self-mastery daily. As the Stoics taught, freedom isn't given, it's practiced. And once you practice it consistently, control no longer finds a place to land. Number 5. Fear of abandonment. Fear of abandonment sits quietly beneath the surface, rarely announced, often but constantly influencing behavior. You can feel it in the subtle shift, the emotional tightening, the unspoken need for reassurance. It isn't weakness in the childish sense, it's human, but it is a vulnerability. And when you understand it, not intellectually but energetically, your entire way of showing up changes. You stop reacting. You stop overgiving. You stop chasing emotional certainty. Instead, you become grounded. And grounding is unsettling to fear, because fear feeds on instability. At its core, fear of abandonment is the fear of being left emotionally exposed, not chosen, not prioritized, replaced, forgotten. That fear doesn't always look like desperation. Sometimes it looks like control, sometimes like testing, sometimes like emotional distance disguised as strength. What matters is this: fear wants proof. And the more you try to provide proof, the more power the fear gains. This is where most men lose themselves. They try to soothe something that cannot be soothed externally. The Stoics understood this deeply. Epictetus said, "If you want to be invincible, make yourself dependent on nothing that lies outside your own will." Fear of abandonment is dependence turned inward. It waits for reassurance from the outside to quiet the noise inside. When you try to manage that fear for someone else, you step into a role that costs you your center. Stoicism teaches the opposite approach. You remain rooted. You don't withdraw, but you don't overextend either. You let your steadiness speak. Here's the shift you need to make. Stop trying to prevent loss. Start embodying completeness. Fear dissolves in the presence of someone who is not afraid of absence. When you are comfortable with space, silence, uncertainty, you communicate something powerful without saying a word. You are not clinging to outcomes. And paradoxically, that reduces the very fear you're no longer feeding. Wrote, never let the future disturb you. You will meet it if you have to, with the same weapons of reason which today arm you against the present. Fear of abandonment lives in imagined futures. What if this ends? What if I'm not enough? What if I'm left behind? Your role is not to argue with those thoughts. Your role is to remain present and consistent regardless of them. You don't accelerate intimacy to lock someone in. You don't retreat to punish uncertainty. You stay aligned. This is where your habits matter. If your emotional state shifts based on perceived closeness or distance, you're already compromised. You must train yourself to remain steady. Same tone, same pace, same self-respect. Fear tests for cracks. Consistency closes them. When you don't chase reassurance, when you don't panic at emotional fluctuations, you become a mirror. Fear sees itself and has nothing to attach to. Seneca warned, "He who suffers before it is necessary suffers more than is necessary." Fear of abandonment suffers in advance. It creates problems that haven't happened yet. When you refuse to participate in that premature suffering, you become an anchor, not a rescuer, an anchor. There's a difference. Rescuers exhaust themselves. Anchors remain. Now let's get practical. Start with this exercise. For the next week, practice emotional neutrality in moments of uncertainty. That doesn't mean coldness. It means you don't rush to fill silence. You don't over-explain. You don't seek confirmation. You breathe, you slow down, you stay present. Notice how uncomfortable this feels at first. That discomfort is your old conditioning trying to regain control. Another exercise, write down what abandonment would actually mean to you. Strip away drama, remove stories, reduce it to facts. You'll notice something important. You survive it in your imagination. And if you can survive it there, you don't need to fear it in reality. This shifts your posture completely. You stop negotiating from fear and start choosing from strength. You should also train detachment, not emotional withdrawal but outcome independence. Said, you can strip away many superfluous things troubling you, for they lie entirely in your own judgment. Detachment is stripping away the need to secure the future emotionally. You show up fully, but you don't grip. You care, but you don't cling. This balance is rare, and rarity creates respect. Fear of abandonment loses power when it's not rewarded, when reassurance isn't endlessly supplied, when drama isn't escalated, when space is allowed without punishment. Your calm response teaches a lesson without words. Connection is chosen, not coerced. That lesson lands deeper than any explanation ever could. Over time, you'll notice a shift in yourself too. You'll become less reactive, less anxious, less invested in outcomes you can't control. And this internal change is the real victory. Because once you're no longer afraid of being left, you stop tolerating behavior that disrespects your time, energy, or values. Epictetus also said, "Freedom is secured not by the fulfilling of one's desires, but by the removal of desire." Fear of abandonment is desire for certainty. Remove the desire and fear collapses. You're not indifferent, you're free. So take action, practice steadiness, embrace space. Let silence exist. Let uncertainty breathe. Every time you don't rush to secure connection, you strengthen yourself. And strength, when quiet and grounded, has a way of calming fear without ever numbing it. Number 6. Comparison with other women. Comparison is one of the quietest struggles people carry, and also one of the most exhausting. It rarely announces itself. It hums in the background, measuring, weighing, ranking. When it comes to comparison with other women, it often hides behind confidence, humor, even self-assurance. But beneath that surface is a constant internal scoreboard, always updating, always watching. You don't see it directly, yet you feel its effects in subtle shifts of mood, energy, and behavior. And once you understand this dynamic, you stop reacting to it and start moving differently. The Stoics warned about comparison long before social hierarchies became loud and public. Wrote, "How much time he gains who does not look to see what his neighbor says or does or thinks, but only at what he does himself." Comparison steals presence. It pulls attention outward instead of inward. When someone is locked in comparison, they are never fully here. Part of them is elsewhere, scanning, measuring, adjusting. That creates tension, and tension leaks. What's important for you is not to judge this tendency, but to recognize how it operates. Comparison thrives on uncertainty. When someone is unsure of their own standing, they look sideways. When their sense of value wavers, they seek reference points. Other women become mirrors, sometimes threatening, sometimes reassuring, but never neutral. This internal comparison creates emotional noise. And emotional noise often leads to subtle testing, reassurance seeking, or shifts in behavior that don't quite match the moment. Here, where your advantage lies, you don't need to point it out. You don't need to respond to it directly. In fact, doing so weakens your position. The Stoic approach is always the same: return to center. Epictetus said, "If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid." In other words, stop managing perception. When you refuse to play the ranking game, when you don't elevate, diminish, or compare, you remove the fuel. Comparison needs participation to stay alive. This is where many men unknowingly fail. They try to reassure, they try to balance, they try to smooth things over. In doing so, they step into the comparison arena and validate it. A Stoic does the opposite. You remain steady. You don't get pulled into silent competitions you never agreed to join. Your calm becomes contrast, and contrast reveals insecurity without you ever numbing it. Understand this clearly: comparison is not about others, it's about identity. When identity is unstable, comparison becomes a crutch. That's why it's hidden. Admitting comparison feels like admitting weakness. So it disguises itself as curiosity, critique, or concern. You don't need to dissect it. You need to stop feeding it with your reactions. Reminded himself, it is not things themselves that disturb us, but our judgments about them. Comparison is a judgment loop. When you stay grounded in your own standards, you don't reinforce that loop. You don't reward emotional spikes. You don't shift your behavior to restore balance. You stay consistent, and consistency quietly exposes what comparison tries to hide. Now let's bring this back to you and your habits. The first practice is internal. Stop comparing yourself. You cannot rise above a dynamic you still live inside. Each time you catch yourself measuring your worth against someone else's progress, status, or approval, pause, breathe, redirect. Ask yourself one question only: am I acting according to my values right now? That question cuts through comparison instantly. Second practice, neutral presence. When comparison energy appears, don't amplify it, don't soothe it, don't challenge it. Simply remain the same. Same tone, same pace, same grounded demeanor. This takes discipline. At first, your instinct will be to fix the tension. Resist that urge. Stoicism is not about fixing emotions, it's about not being ruled by them. Seneca wrote, "He who suffers before it is necessary suffers more than is necessary." Comparison creates imagined losses, imagined threats, imagined hierarchies. When you refuse to respond to those illusions, you remove their power. You show through action that you are not living in a mental tournament. Another exercise, build a daily practice of self-measurement instead of social measurement. At the end of each day, reflect briefly. Did you act with restraint? Did you speak with clarity? Did you maintain your composure? This aligns perfectly with Stoic evening reflection. Did this nightly. Not to judge himself harshly, but to recalibrate. When you do this, comparison loses relevance. You're too busy refining your own character. You should also train silence, not withdrawal, restraint. When comparison seeks engagement, silence starves it. Silence doesn't mean absence, it means presence without performance. This is difficult because silence feels like inaction. It's not, it's mastery. Epictetus taught that freedom begins when you stop needing to respond to every impression. Comparison is just another impression. Let it pass. Over time, something shifts. When you no longer participate in comparison, others feel it. The tension has nowhere to land. The hidden struggle becomes visible, not because you exposed it, but because you didn't cover it up. And paradoxically, this often creates attraction because certainty is calming. You're no longer reactive. You're not adjusting your worth based on invisible scorecards. Remember this, you don't win by being chosen over someone else. You win by being unmovable in who you are. The Stoics never chased superiority. They chased alignment, said, "The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts." When your thoughts are free from comparison, your presence becomes grounded. That grounded presence changes the dynamic without force. So your task is simple but not easy. Stop ranking. Stop reacting. Stop managing invisible competitions. Build yourself inwardly. Act from principle. Remain steady. Let comparison exhaust itself in your silence. When you do, you'll notice that what was once hidden no longer has power over you. And that is real strength, quiet, disciplined, and deeply stoic. Number 7, sensitivity to perceived rejection. Sensitivity to perceived rejection runs deeper than most people are willing to admit, and it shapes far more behavior than surface-level confidence ever reveals. What looks like indifference is often alertness. What looks like control is often anticipation. Rejection doesn't need to be spoken to be felt. It only needs to be imagined. And when something is imagined often enough, the body reacts as if it's real. That's the quiet pressure behind many emotional shifts. The Stoics understood this long before psychology gave it language. They knew that pain doesn't come from events themselves, but from the meaning assigned to them. You need to understand this not to manipulate, but to ground yourself. Because when someone is highly sensitive to perceived rejection, they scan constantly. Tone changes are, silence becomes a verdict. Neutrality feels like distance, and distance feels like danger. This sensitivity isn't weakness in the crude sense, it's overinvestment in interpretation. The mind fills gaps aggressively because it's trying to protect itself. But protection through vigilance becomes exhaustion. And exhaustion leaks out in subtle ways. wrote, "If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it." That sentence alone dismantles the entire mechanism of perceived rejection. The issue isn't what happens, it's what the mind decides it means. And once meaning hardens, emotion follows. The Stoic path is about slowing that process down, creating space between stimulus and story. That space is power. As a man, your role is not to soothe imagined wounds or chase emotional interpretations. Your role is to remain centered. When you don't rush to correct assumptions, when you don't over-explain neutrality, when you don't react to subtle emotional spikes, something important happens. The emotional system across from you is forced to regulate itself. That's not cruelty. That's leadership. You are showing, without words, that not every internal alarm deserves external action. Seneca warned, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." Sensitivity to perceived rejection thrives on imagination. It feeds on unanswered questions, pauses, and ambiguity. If you panic in those moments, if you rush to reassure or clarify every silence, you reinforce the idea that imagined rejection is real and urgent. But when you remain steady, when you don't collapse into reassurance, you quietly communicate something stronger. Absence of reaction does not equal abandonment. This is where your habits matter. You must train yourself to stop responding to emotional cues that are not grounded in reality, not with coldness but with calm. Calm is the antidote to imagined rejection. It doesn't argue. It doesn't convince. It simply stays. And staying without shifting your behavior to manage someone else's interpretation is profoundly grounding. Epictetus taught, "It is not things that disturb us but our judgments about things." Keep that close. When someone reacts to something that wasn't said, to meaning that wasn't intended, the Stoic response is not correction, it's consistency. You don't rush to fill emotional gaps. You don't reshape yourself to prevent discomfort. You let the moment pass without escalating it. This trains both you and the other person that emotional stability doesn't require constant reassurance. Here's a practical exercise you should adopt immediately. Practice delayed response. Not silence as punishment, pause as discipline. When emotional tension appears, give yourself a few breaths before reacting. Let your nervous system settle. Then respond only to what was actually expressed, not what you think was felt. This keeps you anchored in reality rather than pulled into imagined narratives. Another exercise. Write down the difference between rejection and non-engagement. Most people confuse the two. Rejection is a decision. Non-engagement is a neutral state. Train your mind to separate them. This distinction alone dissolves much of the emotional charge around perceived rejection. When you live from this clarity, you no longer take responsibility for interpretations that aren't yours. You also need to examine your own sensitivity. If perceived rejection triggers urgency in you, it will trigger reaction. Stoicism begins internally. Ask yourself where you rush to be understood, where you feel compelled to explain neutrality, where silence unsettles you. These are the places to train, because the more regulated you become, the less you'll be pulled into emotional turbulence that isn't grounded in reality. Also reminded himself, you always own the option of having no opinion. That applies here more than anywhere. You don't need to decide what silence means. You don't need to label distance as danger. You don't need to assign emotional weight to every shift. Choosing no interpretation is often the most powerful move you can make. When you live this way, something subtle changes. Sensitivity to perceived rejection loses its leverage. Emotional spikes soften. Tests dissolve without confrontation. Not because you dominated anything, but because you refused to participate in imagined narratives. You stayed in reality. You stayed composed. And composure is contagious. Make this your discipline. Respond to facts, not fears. Maintain warmth without urgency. Presence without explanation. Consistency without chasing clarity. This is Stoic strength in motion. And when you embody it, you stop being pulled into emotional undercurrents that were never yours to manage in the first place. Number 8. Difficulty with direct communication. Difficulty with direct communication isn't weakness in the way most people think. It's not about lack of intelligence or emotional depth. It's about hesitation, about friction between what is felt and what is said. And once you understand that, you stop reacting emotionally and start responding strategically. You don't take things personally. You don't chase clarity with urgency. You recognize the pattern for what it is, and that alone puts you in a position of quiet strength. What's often hidden is this. Indirect communication usually comes from fear, not manipulation. Fear of conflict, fear of being judged, fear of saying the wrong thing and losing leverage or approval. Instead of stating needs plainly, emotions are hinted at. Signals replace statements. Silence replaces honesty. And when you don't understand this dynamic, you end up filling in the gaps with assumptions, overthinking, or unnecessary effort. That's where many men lose ground. They respond to what they think is being said, rather than what actually is. The Stoics warned against this exact trap. Epictetus said, "We suffer not from events but from our judgments about them." Indirect communication invites misjudgment. It tempts you to interpret tone instead of content, mood instead of meaning. A Stoic approach is different. You don't guess. You don't rush. You don't force conversations into clarity. You stay grounded and let ambiguity reveal itself over time. Calm presence becomes your filter. And calm presence always exposes what urgency hides. Here, the key shift you need to make. Stop rewarding indirectness with emotional labor. When you over-explain, over-respond, or over-accommodate vague communication, you teach others that clarity isn't required. But when you remain composed and consistent, something interesting happens. Indirectness loses its power. The pressure shifts. Either communication becomes clearer or distance naturally increases. Both outcomes serve you. Be tolerant with others and strict with yourself. Being tolerant doesn't mean chasing understanding. It means allowing people to be who they are without abandoning your own standards. You don't demand directness. You model it. You speak plainly. You respond simply. You don't mirror confusion. You don't escalate emotion to extract honesty. You remain steady. And steadiness creates contrast. That contrast makes indirectness obvious without you ever pointing it out. This is where action matters. You need to practice restraint. When something is unclear, resist the urge to decode it. Let silence do some of the work. Let space breathe. Not as a tactic, but as a discipline. Stoicism teaches you to sit with uncertainty without anxiety. Seneca said, "He who suffers before it is necessary suffers more than is necessary." Chasing clarity prematurely is exactly that. You suffer twice, once in imagination, once in reality. Direct communication thrives around emotional safety, not pressure. And emotional safety is created by your consistency, not your persuasion. When you don't react impulsively to mixed signals, when your behavior doesn't spike or dip based on ambiguity, you signal maturity. You show that you don't need everything spelled out immediately to remain grounded. That alone changes how people communicate around you. Now let's make this practical. First exercise, simplify your responses. Fewer words, slower pace, neutral tone. Practice answering without filling space. This retrains your impulse to manage other people's emotions. You're not responsible for translating feelings that weren't clearly expressed. That responsibility belongs to the speaker. Second exercise, notice when you feel the urge to clarify for someone else. Pause, ask yourself if clarity is being avoided or simply not offered yet. There's a difference. Choose patience over pursuit. This strengthens emotional discipline, which is the foundation of Stoic masculinity. Third exercise, commit to direct communication yourself. No hints, no emotional bait. Say what you mean calmly and without expectation, not to teach, not to provoke, but to align. Over time, people either rise to that level or reveal they can't meet it. Either way, you gain information without conflict. Also reminded himself, never let the future disturb you. You will meet it if you have to with the same weapons of reason which today arm you against the present. When communication feels unclear, reason is your weapon, not suspicion, not frustration, not force. Reason allows you to observe patterns without becoming entangled in them. Difficulty with direct communication isn't something you fix in others. It's something you outgrow reacting to. When you stop chasing clarity, clarity either appears or becomes irrelevant. When you stop emotional overinvestment, conversations either deepen or fade, and both outcomes are forms of truth. This is where Stoicism quietly wins. You don't demand openness. You don't punish vagueness. You simply remain centered. Your boundaries are clean. Your responses are measured. Your standards don't fluctuate. And in that calm consistency, indirectness loses its leverage. You don't need to confront it. You don't need to call it out. You simply don't build your decisions around it. So adopt this habit. When communication is unclear, slow down. When signals are mixed, remain neutral. When emotions are implied, don't rush to interpret. Let action speak. Let time clarify. Let your steadiness set the tone. Over time, you'll notice something powerful. Conversations become simpler, dynamics become cleaner, and your inner state becomes harder to disturb. That is the Stoic edge. Not control over others, but command over yourself. Number 9. Internal conflict between independence and attachment. There's a tension that lives quietly beneath the surface, rarely spoken aloud, often misunderstood. It's the pull between independence and attachment, the desire to be self-directed, autonomous, uncontained, and at the same time the longing to feel chosen, anchored, emotionally safe. This conflict doesn't announce itself. It leaks out in hesitation, mixed signals, emotional push and pull. And if you're paying attention, you can feel it long before it's ever explained. What matters isn't judging it. What matters is understanding it without being pulled into it. You see, humans crave freedom and connection simultaneously. That contradiction isn't new. The Stoics wrote about it centuries ago, not in the language of modern psychology, but in something deeper, self-mastery. Epictetus warned, "No man is free who is not master of himself." That line cuts straight to the core. The conflict between independence and attachment exists when self-mastery hasn't fully settled in, when the inner world hasn't been made orderly yet. Here, where you come in. Your power isn't in resolving someone else's internal tension. Your power is in refusing to absorb it. Most men lose ground because they try to stabilize what isn't theirs to fix. They lean in when distance appears. They pull back when closeness feels uncertain. They start adjusting themselves to match the oscillation. And slowly, without realizing it, they surrender their center. The Stoic path is different. It begins with one rule: you stay rooted, you don't chase independence. You don't chase attachment, you don't mirror uncertainty, you become consistent, calm, whole. Wrote, if you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it. That applies here more than you might think. The moment you interpret emotional fluctuation as something you must respond to, fix, or outmaneuver, you give it power. The moment you stop interpreting it, and instead stay aligned with your own values, it loses its grip. This internal conflict shows itself because attachment feels risky. Dependence threatens identity, yet complete independence feels empty without emotional resonance. That push and pull creates friction, but friction only becomes chaos when you step into it emotionally. When you stay grounded, when you don't react, when your behavior doesn't change based on someone else's internal weather, something subtle happens. The tension is exposed without being confronted. And exposure dissolves illusions. Your task isn't to exploit this conflict, it's to outgrow it. When you embody emotional self-sufficiency, you stop triggering the fear that closeness means loss of self. You show, without words, that connection doesn't require collapse. That presence doesn't demand possession. That attraction can exist without emotional bargaining. This is where discipline enters, not discipline over others, discipline over yourself. Seneca wrote, "He suffers more than necessary who suffers before it is necessary." Emotional overinvestment is premature suffering. Overinterpretation is premature suffering. Trying to secure certainty from uncertainty is premature suffering. You don't need to rush clarity. You need to maintain posture. And posture is internal. Here's a practice you should adopt immediately. Every time you feel the urge to lean forward emotionally, pause. Ask yourself one question: am I acting from alignment or from anxiety? Then act only if the answer is alignment. This trains you to move from principle instead of impulse. Over time, your nervous system learns that stillness is safe. Silence is safe. Waiting is safe. Another practice: define your emotional pace and refuse to abandon it. Not as a tactic, as a standard. Decide how quickly you attach, how deeply you invest, how much access you give, and then stick to it regardless of emotional fluctuations around you. This creates contrast, and contrast reveals internal conflicts without you saying a word. Also said, the tranquility that comes when you stop caring what they say, or think, or do, only what you do. That line isn't about indifference, it's about sovereignty. When you operate from your own center, you stop being pulled into unresolved tensions that aren't yours to carry. Here's the paradox you need to internalize. The more complete you are within yourself, the less threatening closeness becomes. Not just for you, but for anyone around you. You stop triggering fear by needing. You stop creating pressure by wanting reassurance. Your presence becomes spacious, and space allows people to confront their own contradictions without you forcing anything. This is why Stoics pass tests without knowing they're being tested. They don't try to win. They don't try to secure. They don't try to stabilize others emotionally. They stabilize themselves. You should also train emotional non-reactivity deliberately, not suppression. Non-reactivity, there's a difference. Suppression is avoidance. Non-reactivity is awareness without movement. Sit with discomfort. Let ambiguity exist. Let unanswered questions remain unanswered. This strengthens your inner frame, and a strong inner frame changes dynamics automatically. One more exercise. Write this sentence down and read it daily. I do not abandon my values to gain emotional certainty. Then live it, in small moments, in quiet decisions, in what you choose not to do. The conflict between independence and attachment is resolved internally, not externally. When you embody wholeness, you stop becoming a mirror for indecision. You stop feeding emotional tug-of-war. You remain steady, and steadiness is confronting, not because it's aggressive, but because it refuses to play along. Epictetus put it simply: seek not that the things which happen should happen as you wish, but wish the things which happen to be as they are. When you accept emotional contradictions without trying to manage them, you free yourself, and freedom is felt instantly. So don't chase closeness. Don't retreat to appear distant. Don't calibrate yourself to emotional swings. Anchor yourself. Build your inner order. Act from it relentlessly. When you do, the hidden conflict becomes visible. And when it's visible, it loses its power over you. You've just seen what most people never slow down enough to notice. These weren't accusations. They were not attacks. They were patterns, quiet, human, and deeply revealing. And the real power here isn't using this knowledge to control anyone. It's using it to control yourself. Because the Stoics understood something timeless. The man who sees clearly is never desperate, never reactive, never easily manipulated. When you understand what's hidden beneath behavior, you stop chasing approval, stop over-explaining, and stop taking things personally. You become grounded, observant, calm, and that calm is felt more strongly than any words you could ever say. Remember, strength is silent, awareness is magnetic, and self-mastery changes every interaction you step into. If this video shifted the way you see relationships, even slightly, then don't stop here. Rewatch it. Let the ideas settle. Notice them in real life. That's where the real transformation happens. And if you want more Stoic truths like this, clear, grounded, and brutally honest, make sure you stay connected. The next video goes even deeper, and you won't want to miss it. Until then, stay disciplined, stay observant, and above all, stay unshaken.